Hello and welcome to AP Psychology at Weymouth High School at Home Edition. I hope your bathrobe is comfy and you've got a cup of coffee because we are jumping right into personality psychology with the man, the myth, and the highly misogynistic Sigmund Freud. So we're looking at personality. We're going to start with the psychodynamic theory of personality. Eventually in this unit, we'll move over to the humanists. We'll take a look at social cognitive, and then finally trait theory. And then we'll look at how personality tests. But today is going to be all about Sigmund Freud's theories of personality. Just a reminder, personality is the combination of behavior, emotions, motivations, thought patterns that define an individual. They are a collection of who you are as a person. There are a lot of issues in personality psychology. Is it caused by genetics or is it environmental? How unique is your personality versus how universally are there universal traits and types of personalities? Do you stabilize in your personality at any point in time? Are you the same personality you were when you were 10 that you'll be when you are 20, 30, 40, or 50? And are you going to get better? Do you have growth in your personality, or are we rather pessimistic? Speaking of pessimistic, we're going to take a look at the psychodynamic theory today under Sigmund Freud. And I think one of the quickest ways to understand this theory of personality is it's going to be a little pessimistic in that there are unconscious motivators that are dragging you down constantly. So if you're going to hear one thing today, it is that dragging down of the unconscious for you. The behavior here, what makes all of these psychodynamic theories with Sigmund Freud and his students, the neo-Freudians, the central tenets, first and foremost, make sure it's highlighted on your concept map, is a belief in the unconscious. That there are drives and desires that people are not aware of, and those shape and mold their personality. Those desires inside the unconscious have conflicting thoughts. Some that want you to be perfect, some that want you to do other things that are not at all perfect, and that causes a lot of tension. Where do all of those stem from? They stem from childhood. So with psychodynamic theories, you want to take a look at the unconscious with conflicts happening in childhood. Oftentimes, sex and aggression are going to fuel those desires, and that will be a little bit different between the neo-Freudians and Freud. We'll get into that. Freud's going to be much more focused on the aggressive and the sexual drives. And finally, how you view yourself and others really comes from your unconscious. So here's Siggy. Hey, Finn. Finn is going to make appearances pretty consistently during our chat. So Finn here is actually in a psychosexual stage. I'm glad this is not a video chat right now, which is running around in his diaper. We'll get to that later. But to really understand Freud, we have to start off by understanding Freud's intellectual world that he grew up in. And there really are three tenets to be able to see kind of where Freud came from. First and foremost, Freud's writing at a time where Darwin was big. Basically, Darwin's theory of evolution breaks down the idea that man is special. And so now Freud can study Freud can study people in any way, just the same way that you would study animals. Helmholtz's law of conservation of energy is also out. So energy is neither created nor destroyed. That's going to be another big part to keep in mind with Freud, because it'll be psychic energy. It can be neither created nor destroyed. And finally, Brooke had that all living organisms are energy systems. So that energy comes from somewhere. And then Helmholtz will argue that it can't be energy, can't be created nor destroyed. And that if I can study humans as any other person, or any other animal, Freud kind of takes all three of these and combines into his view of personality, which first and foremost, you have to understand that his view of personality views the human as driven by an energy system. And the energy system, the gasoline for these drives, are Eros and Thanatos. Eros, the life instinct, which Freud is definitely going to focus on the libido, which is seen as sexual energy, covers all life and self-preserving acts. Thanatos, and you might be thinking now of Avengers and maybe now understand why Thanos is named this, is the death instinct, This covers all the instincts towards aggression and self-destruction. So here you have these two things. I like to think of them as the gasoline for the personality that drives the unconscious. So Freud saw the structure of personality to be split into three things: the id, right here, the superego, and the ego. His view of the mind here is that the id is totally submerged in the unconscious. You don't know your id's desires. Notice the superego is also submerged in part in the unconscious. Try and take a look at this. So the id here, Simpsons fan, it's Homer, it's Bart, it's your baby-like self who, and here's a key term here, is constantly seeking out a pleasure principle. Immediate unconditional gratification of desires. So here the fuel is libido or the sex drive, immediately having those things that you want fulfilled. It's irrational. If you've ever babysat a toddler, like Finn who just ran in here, they're tiny little ids. They want what they want and they want it right now, and if they don't get it, they'll cry. But here your id is submerged in your unconscious. You don't really know what your id wants. And if you're in the audience right now saying, well, I don't have this, then Freud would say, no, you just don't know about having it. And so the id has no contact with the outside world. It only gains contact through reflex actions like a Freudian slip, where you say one thing and cue oldest psych joke in the world, when you say one thing and mean your mother. So it just kind of spills out, or it comes out in wish fulfillment, either through fantasies or through dreams. Take a look at a lot of popular movies. You know, you go to a movie theater, the lights go dark, you don't talk to anyone, it's just you and the movie, and a lot of movies play out wish fulfillment. Look at probably one of the worst examples of this is Transformers. Here, sexually objectified female becomes the girlfriend for nerdy guy. Nerdy guy gets female and a car that turns into a robot. It is a wish fulfillment for the id of the audience. Harry Potter, wish fulfillment to be something special. Twilight series, here I am a new person to this high school, and now I'm being fought over by two supernatural beings. These are all wish fulfillment examples, and maybe why some of these franchises are popular. So the id wants what it wants. We really can't talk about all the things because it's so fueled by the libido that it's unconscious to you. And if the libido wants, and the id, excuse me, wants this thanatos and this sexual energy, the thing that is the check on it, the exact opposite, is the superego. So here's the moral center, the thou shalt and shalt not center. It's the moral code of your society from your parents and your religious leaders and your teachers. But here, I don't want you to think that the superego is all good. The superego also has this other term in here called the ego ideal. And here, almost as destructive as the id, is this desire to be 100% perfect, which is not going to happen either. So now think about this. The id is an aggressive, sexually motivated system that is ruled by the pleasure principle. And on the opposite side here, you have the superego. I think we probably best show it here. On the opposite side here, you have the superego that wants you to be perfect. These two things are not possible. And in fact, when the superego has to acknowledge what the id actually wants, the superego has to admit that it itself is not perfect. So you've got to moderate between these two, and the moderator, the person or part of your personality that's caught in the middle of all of this, is the ego. And the ego has to deal with the reality principle. The ego has to get the id what it wants without grossing out the superego. And the ego has to kind of balance both of this and deal with what we call the reality principle. Now, all of this tension inside the personality causes conflict. So what happens when that conflict, when the id wants what it wants, but it can't let the superego know that? Well, the person has to deal with these in some way, because if they don't, energy can be neither created nor destroyed. There's going to be harm to the psyche. And Freud said that that pressure of id desires versus superego desire for perfection has to be dealt with and released, or there'll be harm to the person. And this is where Freud's psychoanalytic defense mechanisms comes in. And I think this is a good place for us to kind of take a look at each of the mechanisms for defense mechanisms. Students typically get denial and repression confused. So one of the best ways to understand these two is denial is the refusal to acknowledge that the event ever happened. So you have this thing that maybe harms the superego desire perfect. You completely ignore that it ever happened and you just push it down. Repression is pushing down the painful thoughts and feelings as they come up. Now, I want you to think about either of these as you would almost a gas being compressed in your science class. As a gas is compressed, the pressure is built up. And as the pressure builds up, eventually it can explode. So the problem with denial and repression as defense mechanisms, the energy doesn't go anywhere. You just compress it and make it more dangerous eventually. Projection and identification are a way for your id and superego to vent a little bit. Projection, you attribute your own feelings onto others. So here, you will take something about your desires and or your inadequacies, and you will put it out onto someone else and talk to them, talk about your feelings onto them. So your id needs to be perfect. Your superego, needs to be perfect. Your id is not, but your superego cannot just criticize your id. So what it does is it takes the stuff that it wants to criticize. Hey, Finn, my little id is running around. It takes the stuff that you want to criticize, and it goes ahead and it puts it onto a safe subject so that the superego can vent that desire to criticize. Identification is you take on someone else's characteristics to be like their superego. Regression is easy. You throw a tantrum, so your id is able to vent its desires. Intellectualization, exactly what it sounds like. You don't deal with the emotions, so you release the energy just by talking about it rationally. Reaction formation, you need to get energy out, but instead of getting it out in a socially inappropriate way, you change it entirely and vent it in the opposite emotion. This is why you might laugh at a funeral. You want to cry, don't feel emotionally safe in that situation. You have built up energy, so it has to come out somewhere, and it comes out as laughter. Displacement, here you are upset with something. There's aggression, and instead of venting it to the actual source, because maybe they're not safe, you can't just yell at a teacher, you go home and you place that anger onto another source, maybe a parental unit that then you yell at, or a sibling. The only defense mechanism here that is totally healthy is sublimation. And sublimation here is where you transform repressed motives, feelings into socially acceptable forms. So it's a career that helps you vent those desires. It's a physical activity that helps you vent that. But here you're turning it into a socially acceptable form. These lines between the conscious and the unconscious are fluid. They'll slip out through, like I said, Freudian slips, dreams, humor, defense mechanisms. It's an energy system. And these three parts can't build up too much energy, or the person has difficulties. This is a fantastic place to stop. This is really the basic mechanisms of Freud's theory of personality. The key part here to remember is that it's an energy system. It is fueled, especially for Freud, by thanatos and libido, sex and aggression, and that your unconscious is that area for those desires, and those desires are opposed by your superego that has the ego ideal and wants to be perfect. Those two forces have to battle it out with the superego the ego playing the moderator. The next part is to see how this plays out in human psychological development, and that's where we're going to get into the psychosexual stages in our next video.